Good morning, everybody out there. Joining you here from the Walter Anderson Museum of Art, Julian Rankin, I'm director of the museum. And today we have a good, fun, and engaging process, the launch of a larger community engaged design process. And so we're going to be introducing you to a campus expansion that has begun and will continue for the next 18 months and beyond. And we'll be developing a lot right across from the museum that we've owned for some time. So I'm just going to give people a moment to hop in and join, but just to say that this process that this voyage that we're beginning on here this morning is going to look sometimes virtual, sometimes in person as we can, and there will be many opportunities for you, the public, to let us know what you think the museum should be doing with this new development. We want this new project that's called the Creative Complex to be serving the needs of the community, and to have the design driven by this coastal culture and, again, what you all in the public want. So as you're watching, there'll be some questions on the screen. Feel free to drop comments in there. If you're doing it live, we'll pull those comments in and it'll drive our conversation. We're going to be joined today by several different members of our design team, 6 in total. And you'll get to meet all these architects and designers and talk to them. So this conversation, as I mentioned, is ongoing and longitudinal, if you will. And you're going to have, we want you to be a part of this process. You're going to have every opportunity to be involved. I would just like to thank at the top some of our sponsors who are supporting this project. And there are others and there will be more. And we're thankful for all that support. This is a big project here in downtown Ocean Springs and one that we're really excited about. So without further ado, I'm going to jump in and kick this thing off. As I said from the get-go, any questions you have, anything you see that you're curious about, and definitely when you see questions posed to you, drop those in the comments. I'll be right back with you. Okay, so as I mentioned, what we're talking about this morning is the Creative Complex. And this is a 21st century extension of the museum's mission physically across the street to a property we've owned for some time. And what has been sitting on that property, just to orient you, has been and still is the Art Cottage, which is over 100 years old, a building that we've used for education classes for some time. And it has its own challenges in terms of things that needed to be updated. So when we took on this updating of the Art Cottage, we also thought about the entire lot. And so the lot that we have across the street from the museum is 300 feet deep. It's a skinny but very long lot. And so we thought about how could we think about this lot holistically. And so there's 3 phases to this project. We've begun phase 1 to renovate this Art Cottage, but phase 2 and 3, which have not begun yet, are all going to be driven by you, the public. And so that's what we're doing this morning, is launching a process where you will give us feedback. And this is not just going to be museum members. It's not just going to be people living in Ocean Springs. It's not just going to be adults. It's going to be students and partners and educators and community members and anyone who has any stake in the future of the Gulf Coast and the continuation of the legacy of Walter Anderson. And so we're super excited about all that entails. So if you see any construction happening now, it's the renovation of the Art Cottage to keep that preserved and updated. And then as we move into 2021, you'll start to see more conversations about what the rest of that 300-foot deep lot looks like. So to jump in, we wanted to first introduce a couple members of our design team. So the way this is working is we have 3 wonderful entities and organizations who are helping us out. The first of which is the Gulf Coast Community Design Studio, and they are helping us actually lead this community engaged design process. So I wanted to bring in Elizabeth Engelbretson and David Perks and have them introduce themselves and what the Community Design Studio does. The thing to say before we all dive in is this whole process is going to be driven by questions. Isn't that right, David? Isn't that the kind of the functional, the fulcrum around which all this turns?
Well, I think that as we ask questions, then it really opens up all sorts of ideas.
So I'm going to pull in a question. So as I said, we're going to be having questions for months to come. But one big question, and if you're watching now, whether you're live or if you watch this after, put your comments into the comment section, whether you're on Facebook or YouTube, and we'll either pull those in live or also use them as ways to inform the ongoing gathering of input. Elizabeth, make sure you're unmuted, but why don't you introduce yourself and tell us kind of what you're excited about in this whole project, and maybe why the questions, like overarching questions like what does community mean, why those are important when we're addressing a project like this.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm Elizabeth Engelbretson with Gulf Coast Community Design Studio. I'm excited to work on this project because we're taking a holistic view and a view based out of inclusion and bringing community together for a common goal and for a shared experience. And I think there's no better way to do that than by creating art and rooting yourself in the space. So I'm excited to get feedback from the community to see what that means. What does it mean to have equitable design and equitable public space?
So David, can you tell us, just define for us what community engaged design is, and give us a sense of what kind of opportunities will be available to people?
Yeah, I think it's good to start by defining design. I think a lot of people think of design as being this kind of mysterious, kind of creative process, when in fact design is just making decisions. It's a whole bunch of decisions, interactive decisions, iterative decisions, decisions that affect decisions. And so community-driven design is just getting a whole lot of people involved with that decision-making process, so that we can make a decision that is well informed and certainly beyond what any single one or two people could make on their own. So it's really expanding the whole decision-making process so that we get a lot more voices, and so that in the end we don't miss an idea that would have come up otherwise.
Yeah, no, that's great. And y'all's role, as I said, is going to be leading all this. And that overarching question, I'm going to put it back up on the screen for folks out there. What does community mean to you? What is the definition of community? I think we think about these terms that we live with every day that are so common, but at the same time, how often do we revisit what those things mean? And we also wanted to have y'all comment and think about these ideas through the lens of Walter Anderson. I'll just say from our perspective and in the conversations we've had as a design team so far, the question has been how do you operate in really three different ways, in a community-based way, that you're building something and creating something with the public green space and the new educational facilities that we'll see in phase 2 and 3 of this project that fulfill the needs of the community. How are you treating and approaching nature, which is obviously core to what we do, but also really important for any community-based development? And then how can you examine this idea of space and time, especially when you think about Walter Anderson, whose legacy grounds everything we do, but also we have to continue moving into the challenges of the 21st century. So there's a conversation around that. And I'm going to pull up a few images of the community center, because that was one of the artworks that y'all wanted to at least comment and focus on in thinking about this civic obligation that Anderson expressed, and the fact that this artwork is still a functional space, of course, a polling place, an area that reinforces the role of art and culture in community life. What would y'all say about this artwork and the way that that you might see it influencing kind of our process?
So I can say something, then Elizabeth can. I think community is both real and imagined, right? There's real conditions of geography, of people who already are sort of defined in various ways that we classify ourselves. But it's also, communities are imagined, and a community can be imagined as this kind of, expansive, diverse set of people that people can imagine themselves being a part of. And I certainly feel every time, and I hope many of you that are listening have been in the community center, and whenever I'm in there, I feel I'm just surrounded by this light-filled, sort of diverse, energetic space where it seems like every surface has been sort of energized by Walter Anderson's sort of use of line and color and shape. And for me, the thing that I love about that space is this sort of diversity, that the art is not kind of pristine, framed, on a wall in an isolated way. That is very much, we're surrounded by it with a kind of rich diversity, and that to me is what a community is.
Yeah, Elizabeth, what would you say? I think that's a good point to bring up, and I think one of the things that defines that space is it's a functional, utilitarian space as much as it is as an aesthetic, treasured space.
Well, and also it's a space intended to bring people together. It's used as a voting place. It's used as a gathering place. And what does it mean when we can gather together to share an experience? What does it mean to be surrounded by the ability to explore? I think that's what the space is for me. You can walk into that space and for the 50th time and see something new. It gives you the opportunity to look both at the larger picture of the ecosystem and the people and the history, but then it also gives you the opportunity to see the details and to appreciate the uniqueness of each part of our community.
Definitely. Well, we're gonna say goodbye momentarily to y'all and bring in our next design team members. In the meantime, I'll just remind the folks out there that we want you to go ahead and comment in the comment section. What does community mean to you? We're going to bring back Elizabeth and David after we meet some more designers and architects here momentarily. So go ahead and drop some comments in there while we're waiting for for the other members to come on board. And in the meantime, I'm going to pull them in. Here's Tall Architects, which they're leading the construction and design of the actual facilities that we're expanding. So to kind of reorient you, phase one being the art cottage renovation, they've led that design process and are working with our contractors to renovate that space. And then they'll be involved in the phase two design of what new facilities could we put on this property to do our 21st century education, cross-sector education that delves into ideas of marine science and nature and innovation. So welcome, Madison and Mark Talley of Tall. How are y'all doing this morning?
Good, thanks for having us, Julian.
So I wanted to introduce the second question that folks can hopefully mull around and roll around in their brain. We talked about what does community mean, but also what does good design mean to you? And I like to think of nature as an ultimate designer. So that's one of the things we're influenced by, but also how does the urban landscape and the built landscape exist within nature? And how does that perhaps synergize and benefit the organic world through people using their own capacity for design? So I'm gonna first of all, before we look at the artwork y'all chose, why do you think those kind of questions, how do they help your process? Because not all of us, in fact, very few of us have any capacity or experience designing a building. But in the same way, the community is actually expert in many of the ideas that help influence the architects to actually design something. So how does that process work for you, having these fundamental questions asked to community members and stakeholders when y'all approach a project?
Yeah, so I think this is a really interesting way to approach a project and a way that we're really excited about, kind of getting the whole community on board before we start designing. We normally start with a list of, questions to our clients, but typically our clients aren't, a whole community like this. So I think that what we're aiming to do is put the user at the forefront. And I think that David, like that answer to what is design is just making decisions. I think that's a really simple and beautiful way to start to talk about design. But what we're trying to do is to eliminate a lot of the fluff and allow a space that is going to allow people to create, be creative, and feel like they're part of the community.
And all design is intended to inspire, at least the design that we are gravitated towards and like to create. In this situation, this is supposed to inspire artistic creation and community involvement. And so the building or the structure that will be built will just be containers comparable to, say, a jacket on a novel. It's really about what's going to happen and what's going to be created inside of that jacket. And because there will be such a rich exterior involvement as well, the building, while it will be really nice, we're really excited about being involved with that. It will just be part and parcel to the overall effect of creating and inspiring artistic community.
Yeah, and I also think, selfishly, we want something beautiful for our community. Our office is just right down the street from the museum, right down the street from the site. So this is a place that we want to create where we want to visit. We want to bring our kids. We want to, bring our family members to classes, to lectures, to music events. I think it's just a really exciting thing for the city of Ocean Springs, and I think it's just going to be a catalyst for great things to come.
And speaking of a continuation, so the museum has such a rich history, and the art college has been used for so many years to generate creativity, to encourage next generations to make art. But as Julie, you were saying, it needed some help to make it the next few decades and really make it a place for making art, but also just general upkeep. And so we're really excited that that renovation is moving forward. We're essentially a part of the building having to recreate it from the ground up. But what that will do is this will be the first step in creating this entire creative complex where as you move through the property, as you're doing art in this space, it's kind of, this is the blender between the old front of the college and the 21st Century Museum property behind it. And so it'll be, throughout the long period of property, it will be somewhat of a transition from traditional ways of doing things to current ways of doing things.
Right, and we even thought about the design of the art cottage in that way. When you walk in the front room, it's going to remain pretty historically accurate, and then as you move through the space, it gets a little more contemporary all the way out to the back, and then that's sort of setting the tone for this next phase.
Yeah, so the ultimate goal is, so how we see it as it relates to community, is we want this to be a 21st century museum for the community. So a lot of what will be done will be to generate future artistic endeavors, and we want to make sure the building, the property, the gardens are all perceived in a way that this is a legitimate museum, and this is how it's going to progress in the future.
So I want to pull in the artwork that y'all chose to talk about, and this is one of Anderson's kind of most powerful works in the way in which he's using line and negative space to create something that's very dynamic. And there's people love this work and obviously love much of his work, but I wonder about this piece as it pertains to y'all's design sensibility. What was it that drew you to this one, and what would you say perhaps about the lines or the forms that you find compelling?
Yeah, so I would just say that what draws us to this particular piece is just the simplicity. I mean, we see a lot of parallels with Turn and our work. We try to design without a lot of fluff, and I think that, with this piece, Walter Anderson really got to the heart of, what a turn is without needing to add in a lot of extra detail. And it just has so much emotion, and it's a really powerful piece. And I think that's what we goal for our architecture to be.
So unlike a lot of his work, which is very powerful, a lot of the work, he uses a lot of texture and a lot of colors and a lot of movement, and almost makes it 3D. This, it looks like the intention was to actually keep it two-dimensional. Just a few simple bold lines that somehow create a moving complexity, a liveliness that it looked like the bird is somehow flattening on the page, but it's not. It's so elegant and simple. We are both drawn to it, sure.
So we have a couple of comments I wanted to pull in. One here about the materials we'll be using. And of course, we haven't chosen the materials. So I think the short answer is, of course, there is an opportunity for anything. But what would y'all say about these questions about the sustainable, recycled, repurposed materials, and then perhaps the LEED certification in this new construction?
Yeah, so any project we tackle, we are goaling to use sustainable, recycled, or repurposed materials. We haven't gotten into the design process yet, so I think that is something we're keeping, at the forefront. But I will say another thing that we're interested in doing, not just sustainable, recycled, repurposed, would be local materials, locally available materials to cut down on the transportation. That not only cuts down on cost, but also, emissions. So very interested in that, trying to source locally. We haven't kind of determined what that radius is yet, but that'll be something that we're keeping in mind. As far as it being LEED certified, we haven't, I don't think that is going to be part of this project. But that is something that we haven't truly gotten into yet.
And so while it might not be LEED, we approach every single project with sustainability and long-lasting nature as the first goal. So we're never going to work on anything that's not going to be energy and economically focused. So that, from a fundamental standpoint, that has to do with knowing where to place the windows, knowing how to get water off the building, how to shape the building, to use materials that last a really long time. A lot of sustainability has to do with picking products that will last a really, really, really long time versus something that may seem good in the beginning but only last a short while. We want it to be there a really long time, long after a lot of us are even associated with this project. The project still needs to be strong, similar to the archive visit.
Yeah, I think we're going for minimal upkeep, resilient materials. That is, what we're hoping to kind of bring to this project. And then kind of touching on LEED again, I think, we think of LEED and that is, sort of like the pinnacle of, sustainable design, but it might not have a LEED stamp on it necessarily, but it is going to be a very sustainable building.
Totally. So we're gonna leave y'all for a minute and bring y'all back. And again, reminding folks to let us know what you think about these ideas and some of these overarching questions. Drop them in the comments. What does good design mean to you? And while you're thinking about that, I'm going to pull in the third member of our design team, which is Native Habitats. So this is Rob Anders and Robert Poor. How are y'all doing this morning?
We're doing good, Julian.
That's good to hear. And Rob, I want to make sure you're unmuted before we ask you to say too much. But y'all are going to be leading the process of thinking about how does the landscape architecture fit in with the built environment. What I know just in your name, Native Habitats, you're all about native plants. And the question that we chose to pose to the public, which was one that Robert Poor brought to us. This is a paraphrase of that question, but how tidy or wild do you want your nature? So I think this is one, again, we want y'all to weigh in on in the community, but tell us, Robert, maybe where that idea came from and what that question is really getting at.
That idea came from a conversation with me and the late Edward Blake. And to explain what it means, if one tree limb falls in your yard, do you rush out and pick it up? Or do you wait for 2 limbs to fall? Or 3? Or do you let nature take care of the limbs in nature's own way? I've come to notice that over the years, that tidier you make your nature, the less complex and diverse the patterns. And this provides less opportunity to immerse in nature and create art. The less tidy you let nature become, the more complex and diverse the patterns. And this provides more opportunity to immerse in nature and create art. Ask the question. So the question becomes, do you want more opportunity or less opportunity to immerse in nature and create art? My answer would be, I think Walter would want all the opportunity he could get to experience the act of immersion with nature and creation of art. After all, he burned his art for a fire and saved the blank page for the next day's opportunity to immerse with nature and create the art. So I think this theory has also another name that I call it my blank page theory.
Rob, what would you add to that? I mean, and just for anyone who doesn't know Robert Poor, I mean, who we just heard from, Robert is on the forefront of thinking about how, especially in Mississippi museum environments, how we can create spaces that challenge, fundamental assumptions about what a landscape architect should do and does, and also how the plants, native plants and arrangement of plants. But it's also not just letting everything grow wild. I mean, there's an editing and there's a design to it. So I love the tension between that. Rob, what would you say from the work you've done with Robert and your perspective on all this? And while you're talking, I will say we're going to pull in the artwork y'all are kind of chose to comment on, which is Walter's cottage at Shearwater, which is surrounded in this image and continues to be by a panoply of different native plants.
Okay, what I'd say about that in relation to Walter Anderson's art and how he looked at nature was he was observing and immersed in what many might see as a very chaotic natural environment. And in his art, he distills it down to something very ordered that the common man can see and recognize patterns in. And that's part of what I think our role is. Not to oversimplify, but to show the richness and diversity that is in nature.
And how do y'all, as we're thinking about, even in this image, there's a dwelling amidst the landscape and in the natural world. I think it's also interesting with people who think about landscape architecture, how you create rooms, garden rooms and spaces for different experiences that are just formed by plants. I mean, Robert, how do you approach that idea? And I know, and the great thing about this project is we're on the very forefront, the tip of this conversation, that it hasn't yet happened. All the community feedback we're going to get is going to help us decide how that looks. But how do you approach that idea of your role, the role of the architect's hand in letting nature do its organic thing and creating these different experiences for people?
The whole point is to let nature become part of architecture, and architecture to become part of nature. That there isn't two separate, it's a whole. And Walter saw the environment and the buildings in the picture that we looked at. Walter's cottage, I believe Walter was wondering, how does nature see the cottage, not how the cottage sees nature. And that's what I took from the painting. And we create spaces and we go through the sequence of spaces. It's like rooms in a building. A building has space and walls and ceilings and floors. And we have masses of different kinds of plants and overhanging limbs. And we can make a wall either penetrable with your vision so you see partially through it, or make it so thick you can't see through it or even walk through it. And we create space, and function is another element that's part of this. And function has to occur, and the space has to shape itself around the function. And the form is ecological in nature, and it should always be. And the form in the landscape comes from nature as we see the process.
Yep. Well, let's do this. Let's pull everybody back in as we close out. and have a little bit of back and forth. And I just want to reintroduce the questions to everyone out there who's watching. Again, whether you're watching live or after the fact, drop your comments and feedback into the comment section here. And what you say right now is going to start building a critical mass of public feedback through various different mechanisms, this being the launch of this project. So what does community mean to you? What does good design mean to you? And then, as Robert Poor just articulated, how tidy do you want your nature, and what do you think the implications of those, of that degree of tidiness or wildness might be? So just to bring it back to everybody, you certainly don't have to have any new realizations, to use another Anderson term, but hearing your colleagues talk about anything, do you have anything that emerged after hearing them weigh in on their artwork choices and their fields of work?
I actually wanted to weigh in on something that you said, Julian. You posed the question, how does the urban landscape exist within nature? And I think that's something to be explored through this process. We're not trying to recreate the marsh. We're not trying to recreate the forest. We're trying to integrate the urban landscape of Ocean Spring and the collective ecology of the area. So I like that question.
Yep.
I think it's important.
So, Robert, you mentioned Rob, you mentioned not oversimplifying the nature. And that is a very interesting idea. A lot of what people would consider architecture is distilled down where you are intentionally not complicating it, versus if you want to create a natural environment, simplifying is the antithesis to the goal, because then you are restraining what nature wants to do. So it's a very intriguing complex that we're excited to have, the notion that the building has to be somewhat simple. If not, you can't build it, but the nature can't be too simple, because then it's not going to look natural. So that's a very interesting contradiction. Yeah,
and it's part of a dialogue between the two. It's creating a frame within which to view or experience the chaotic nature.
Well, and I think starting to kind of tackle some of those questions this early on in a project is really going to allow us to explore and play a little bit more. I don't think typically we would start working together like this, right now in a project. So I think that the final product is just a really exciting thing. We've just never worked on something like this before.
Yeah, and go ahead, David.
So I think one of the interesting both opportunities and challenges on this project is that that this lot is not very big, which is an interesting sort of challenge, because when we talk about nature and its kind of like unbounded, sort of aspect. So in a way, what we do on this lot is certainly not going to be self-contained, but it's going to be a bit of a kind of a lens or a kind of viewfinder to help people kind of sort of think and imagine things that are beyond this lot. So I think the whole idea of the kind of creative complex is that it's even though the lot itself is contained, but the work that comes from it is going to be expansive, and to have ways that it kind of connects to things outside of itself.
When you say that, it reminds me of the little room, Walter Anderson's room that was actually removed from the cottage that we looked at earlier that he painted. But for anyone who knows Walter Anderson, this is the crown jewel of the museum, small, basically 10 square or so room that is painted floor to ceiling with all of the dynamism of the natural world. And it's almost serves as a portal to all of the nature and the transformative experience that Anderson had. So in some ways we could call this, instead of the creative complex, it could be the little lot,
That's great.
A little space across the street. It's very long, like we said, 300 feet and about 50 or so feet wide. So it is a small lot, but also it has this opportunity to transport you back and perhaps deeper into some of these ideas. And that is going to be part of the fun of working with y'all to figure out how to demarcate and create spaces within that confined area But I think philosophically, the little room is a good analog for how something so small can create so many synapses and activity between those things, that the ideas that can exist in close proximity, but still transport folks out. And I'll just say part of the reason that we're doing this project in our education philosophy is that, we are a museum that has a physical campus, of course, this creative complex being part of it, but we also venture out, as Walter Anderson did. So the creative complex is going to be a locus for educational programs that may include going out to Horn Island, for example, and bringing ideas and artwork and experiences back to the creative complex. So it is not in itself even something that is confined by its borders. It's just an extension. And I'll bring in a comment from, just an affirmation that our curator, Maddie Codling, is throwing out there too. The other thing about Anderson working small is most of his Horn Island watercolors, which are seen as his most visionary work, many of which were discovered after his death, that he painted mostly for himself to connect with nature. As we mentioned, those were done on 8.5 by 11 typing paper. So I think it is an appropriate size of a lot. I think we're in Ocean Springs, we're downtown. We have this blank page, as Robert Poor mentioned, this blank page idea. I just love the way that Anderson's philosophy is woven throughout these ideas that we've already posed today. So last words, anybody want to say anything maybe directly to the public, or just leave us with any guiding thought before we sign off?
So can I say something real quick? Obviously, the role that Elizabeth and I in our design studio has, we are going to come up with input that will be way beyond what will all fit in this project. So part of, I think, the interesting opportunity for us is to realize that there's going to be a kind of abundance of ideas and opportunities, and so part of what we're excited about is how do we hold on to those, knowing that if they don't all kind of fit in the creative complex as a place, they will certainly come and influence the work of the museum as it goes forward.
Yep, I agree with that. I mean, part of this whole project is going to influence our strategic plan and the future directions of the museum. So for all the public community members out there, know that your commentary, as we continue to seek it and to get you involved in this project, is critical, not just to this project, but to the future of the museum itself. So thank you all for being here. I know we'll see you early and often as we continue this project, but we have a wonderful design team, and so grateful to have all y'all here this morning. So have a great rest of the day. Wave goodbye, Rob.
Thank you.
All right, we'll see y'all later.
All right, bye.
So thank you all out there watching, and those who will see this after it's live. As I mentioned, 3 questions that we want you to weigh in on, to give your feedback on as we continue to tease these out. What does community mean? What does good design mean to you? And how tidy do you want your nature? And these will be supplemented by many more questions, focus groups, and design charrettes with students and partners and all levels of stakeholders. And just to say again that we're grateful to all the support we've received thus far, and continue to look forward to bringing something wonderful, public-private partnership to the city of Ocean Springs that doesn't only serve Ocean Springs, but serves the entire coast, the entire Gulf South, and all of Mississippi as we continue to celebrate and extend the legacy of Walter Anderson. So we'll talk to y'all soon. Look forward to going through this project with everyone out there, and hope you have a wonderful day and weekend.